Alright. Alright guys, for your warm-up, it wants you to simplify this expression. So notice what we're doing here is that we're multiplying 4x to the negative 5/3 y to the 1/2 times x cubed y to the 2 over 3. That's a rational exponent, and so what we're going to do is whenever we're multiplying right here, we're going to add our exponent. So notice that there's nothing to multiply with this 4, right? There's understood 1 right here, so that's just going to be 4. But I notice that x, this is a negative 5/3 and a 3. So I'm going to have negative 5/3 plus 3, because I'm going to add my exponents. And then for the y, I notice I've got 1/2 and 2/3. So I'm going to have 1/2 plus 2/3. So whenever you're multiplying, remember you add the exponents. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the calculator, and I'm going to see what negative 5/3 plus 3 is. So I'm going to pull out the calculator, negative 5/3 plus 3. Good, and let me see if I can show that right here. Alright, and so if I go to the calculator, where's my calculator? Alright, so my calculator closed. Alright, let me open the calculator back up. And so that way in the video you can see how to type this in. But once the calculator pulls up, we're just going to put in negative 5/3 plus 3. So how you would do that is, remember, hit Control Divide to make a fraction. And so you do negative 5 over 3, and then we're going to put plus 3, and that gives me 4/3. So I'm going to go back to the problem right quick, and it's right here. And so negative, so that would be 4/3 for the x, and then for the y, I do 1/2 plus 2/3, and so 1/2 plus 2/3, so I'm going to come here, I'm going to hit Control Divide, 1/2 plus 2/3, so hit Control Divide again, 2/3, and that's going to give me 7 over 6. And so I'm going to have 7 over 6. And so my answer for this problem will be 4x to the 4/3 y to the 7/6. And that would be my answer for this problem. Alright, so moving on, make sure you've got that. Moving on, your essential question for today is still, how do we simplify rational exponents? How do we simplify at rational exponents? And so we're going to be looking at 4 examples today. And these 4 examples are the ones that I want you to put in your notes. That way you can study, because you will see these again at some point. Just a reminder, your test is on Tuesday. We're going to spend Friday and Monday reviewing all the previous topics and then coming back and then taking the test on Tuesday. So I've got 4 examples I want you to get down. And here is your first one right here. Alright, so for this problem, while you write it down, it is a to the negative 3/2, b to the 1/3, and notice there's a time symbol right there. A to the negative 3/2, b to the negative 1, all over a to the negative 2, and the whole thing is raised to the negative 1/3. What we're going to be doing here is we're going to combine all 3 of what we learned yesterday into one problem. So these are the 4 types of problems that we're going to see for these 4 examples. Now, if you remember from yesterday, and like on the warm-up, whenever you're multiplying, you add the exponents. So in theory, guys, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and take care of this stuff that's on the inside. But not saying that that's not wrong, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to tackle this negative 1/3 first. So I'm just going to circle that to let you know that's where I'm going to start. I'm not saying you have to start there. You could work on the inside if you wanted to, but I'm going to start on the outside first and then work on the inside. And so if you notice that this is in parentheses and it's raised to the negative 1/3. Well, if you remember from yesterday, whenever you have an exponent to an exponent, what you do is you distribute. Just like if you saw parentheses on a problem, you would distribute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, I'm going to distribute that negative 1/3 to each one of those powers. And so what I mean by that is that's a negative 1/3. And so I'm going to multiply each one of those. So what I'm really going to do is I'm going to multiply negative 3 over 2 times a negative 1/3. And so I could use my calculator, but to save some time so I don't have to go back each time, I'm just going to do this with it. Now you can type it in your calculator, but so I'm going to start off with negative 3/2 times a negative 1/3. So here's what I'm going to have. For the numerator, I'm going to have a, and then if I multiply negative 3/2 times a negative 1/3 in my calculator should give me a positive 1/2. So again, I get that by multiplying negative 3/2 times a negative 1/3. And so that's what I get. I get 1/2 if you type that into your calculator. And do the same thing for the next one. So do negative 1/3 times a positive 1/3. Well, if you multiply that, you're going to get b to the 1/3 times a negative 1/3. Your calculator will give you a negative 1/9. And so you've got to do this to each one of them. So then times, so there's that times symbol right there. And then I've got a to the negative 3/2. So I'm going to multiply that by negative 1/3. So negative 3/2 times a negative 1/3. Well, a negative times negative is positive. Negative 3/2 times a negative 1/3. If you use your calculator should give you 1/2, and that's with a, sorry, a to the 1/2, and then b. And again, multiply. So negative 1 times a negative 1/3. So again, use your calculator. Negative 1 times a negative 1/3. Your calculator should give you a positive 1/3. And then don't forget, you still got to do that bottom, because see, the whole thing is in parentheses. So you do need to distribute to the bottom one also. So this is a, that's right. If you use your calculator, do negative 2 times a negative 1/3. That should give you a positive 2/3. And so that was my first step. So if you remember, we did 3 types of problems yesterday. The first one was distributing. Next thing I noticed is I have multiplication right here. So just like the warm-up, I'm going to change colors now. Just like the warm-up, whenever you're multiplying, make sure that you add your exponents. So what I mean by that is you see this 1/2 and this 1/2. So those are both A's. So 1/2 plus 1/2 is going to be 1 whole. So I'm just going to put 1 right there. Your calculator will give you a 1 if you do 1/2 plus 1/2. And then for B, I notice that I've got a negative 1/9 plus 1/3. And so a negative 1/9 and a plus a 1/3. Your calculator should give you 2/9. And so I've got a to the first, b to the 2/9. And then don't forget, you still have this over a to the 2/3. All right. And so this is where we're at so far. And so notice why it's called simplifying is because look how complex this expression looks like. We're not done, but look how we've already broken it down to look just like this. And so we're simplifying it. We're making it smaller. All right. Yeah, that's right. Now here's the thing though. When you move this up, notice right quick. This is a positive, right? It's a positive exponent. So when we move it up, what's it going to change to? Good. All right. So let's do that. So like Val said, this is going to be a to the first. You're going to move that other a up, so it's a to the negative 2/3, and then b to the 2/9 still. And the reason why that's important is because look right here. Now you've got this a to the first, a to the negative 2/3. So now let's just add our exponents. So 1 minus 2/3, you should get 1/3 in your calculator, and there's the answer. And so that's what's great about this problem, guys. I know that a lot of people flipped out because of how, and I'm not going to lie, it does look complexing right here. But what you've done is you've taken this complexing problem and you have simplified it to just these 2 little pieces of information. That's all that you have done for that problem. And that's all we're going to be doing for these 4 problems. So that's the first one. And so we're going to do 3 more examples. All right, so take a second, and here's your second one. Go ahead and write down your next problem, and it's right there. Okay, so go ahead and take a second and write down that problem. And I'm going to pause the video. All right. Okay, all right, so now here's the difference, guys, and I want you to notice this also. Notice that you see those parentheses, so y'all know y'all are going to have to distribute, but here's the kicker. On that last problem, wasn't the parentheses around the whole thing?
Yes.
Yeah, that's squared, but it's not on the whole thing. It's only on the top. So, guys, you ain't going to distribute to the bottom, okay? All right, so let's just distribute to the top. So I'm going to draw them little arrows so you can see them. And then don't freak out right here. Guys, you see this X that's right here? What's the understood number on it? It's not. Go ahead and put a 1 there on your paper so you don't miss it. So you put a 1 right there. Bless you. All right, so that's great. So you see I didn't draw no arrows to the bottom one because it ain't in parentheses. All right, so here's what you should get if you type in the calculator. If you multiply, so the first one, 3 times 2, that'll give you 6, and then times X. And then 3/2 times 2, if you use your calculator, that should give you 3. Y, 3/2 times 2, again, use your calculator, it should give you 3, times X, and it's to the first, so 1 times 2, that should give you 2, and then Y, 2 times 2, that should give you 4. That actually worked out great, so no fractions, but 6, 3, 3, 2, 1. Now, in the bottom, I'm not going to do anything to that because there's no parentheses down there, so I don't distribute. So I'm not going to, you know what, I'm going to write it, but I'm not going to worry about it, because right now I'm going to change colors. In the numerator, y'all see that multiplication sign right there, and whenever you multiply, you're going to make sure you add your exponents. So watch what I'm going to get. So all the x's, so you see the 6, the 3, and the 2. So 6 plus 3 is 9, 9 plus 2 is 11. And then the y, I've got a 3 and a 4. Add that together, you get 7. And then we're going to put that over x to the 1/2 and y to the 3/4. And just because I remember what Nyla said a second ago, you see both of these, they're both in the bottom. I'm going to move them to the top, but both of them are positive, so when I move them to the top, that means they're both going to be negative. And I'm going to put them side by side, so that'll be x to the negative 1/2, and then y to the negative 3/4. That way you can see them side by side. And so now you can use your calculator, add your exponents, 11 minus 1/2. That should give you 21 over 2. And then for y, do 7 minus 3/4. That should give you 25 over 4. And that is your answer, as easy as that is. And see, you've taken this whole complex thing and broke it down. Now, I will tell you guys, if you write, and I know you're writing these down, these are what the test questions are going to look like. So if you've got these down and you study them, you'll be good to go. Okay, so we did one, here's the second one, and then we're going to try 2 more just to make sure you're okay. All right, so there's your answer. X to the 21 over 2, y to the 25 over 4. And that's it. That's all that you've got to do for that problem. All right, here's your third one. Go ahead and take a second and write it down. I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to say some of that over again. So for this problem, notice, guys, that the parentheses it's not around the whole thing. The parentheses is only around these 2 things right here. So I'm not going to distribute this -2 to everything. I'm only going to distribute it to these 2 things right here. So that means that y to the -3rd gets left alone. But this x right here, I'm going to multiply a -5/4 times a -2, and that, if your calculator, should give you 5 positive, 5 over 2. And then the same thing for y. A -5/4 times a -2, your calculator should give you 5 over 2. And that's the only thing you distribute, because in the bottom there's no parentheses, so you leave that alone. And so that's what I've got so far. Doesn't look like I've done a lot, but you distributed. Now in the top, you notice that this is multiplication up here. I know it doesn't look like it, but there's multiplication points right here. So that means we're going to add our exponents. So I'm going to circle it. See this -3 and that 5/2. So I'm going to put y, and then if I use my calculator, -3 plus 5/2, that should give me a -1/2 in the calculator. There's nothing I can do with that x to the 5/2 right now, but then what I'm going to do is write it over what's in the denominator. So that's what I've got so far. And it even looks a little bit more simpler than what we started with, right? But we still can do a little bit more. Both of these. Oh, this is where it's a little bit tricky. Look at it. This x to the 1/2 is a positive, so when you move it up, we know that's going to be a negative. What's going to happen to this -3/4 when you move it up? That's right. So here's what you're going to have. You're going to have y to the -1/2, and then when I move that y to the -3/4 up, it's going to turn into a positive 3/4. And then when you move this when you move this 1/2 up, it's going to be -1/2, and then that 5/2 still stays positive. So that's what we've got so far. And I'm going to change colors one more time to put it right here. So now use my calculator, -1/2 plus 3/4. That should give me, if I use my calculator correctly, that should give me 1/2. And then x, if I do -1/2 plus 5/2, my calculator should give me a positive 2. And so that will be my answer for this problem, y to the 1/2 x squared. And so again, you've taken this complex one and you've simplified it to that little one that's right there. And so that's my third. So the last example that we're going to do together before we do our classwork is this example right here. And so go ahead and take a second and write it down. And it looks like this. Okay. All right. Now, for this one, it does look like it's rather long, but it's not. We can tackle this. It says m to the negative 3/2 into the 2/3 times m into the 4th. And then look where the parentheses are, so that's important. So you see this 2/3. You're not going to distribute it to everything, just distribute to that. And that's over m into the negative 2. All right, now, here's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to go ahead and distribute that 2/3 to just what's in the parentheses. So here's what's going to be left alone. M to the negative 3/2 into the 2/3 times m. You know what, while I'm here, there's no number on this m, so I'm going to put an understood 1. So this is m to the 1st, into the 4th, and now let me distribute this. So m to the, multiply 3 times 2/3 in your calculator, you should get 2, and then n, multiply 4/3 times 2/3, that should give you 8/9 in your calculator. So that would be 8/9. And that's the only part you distribute, because now on the bottom, that's m, and you know what I'm going to put to the first power, n to the negative 2. And so that's what I've got so far, and I'm going to change colors now. So I'm not going to mess what's in the denominator yet, because right now, in the top, I'm going to go ahead and add my exponents, and I've got a lot going on here. So I'm going to start with the m's first. So m. This is negative 3/2 plus 1 plus 2. Okay, so I'm going to put m, so it's negative 3/2 plus 1 plus 2. And so what I'm going to do is, use my calculator. You can do all this at one time. Negative 3/2 plus 1 plus 2. I'm just curious what's that going to give me, so I'm just going to go to it right quick. So negative 3/2 plus 1 plus 2, and I'm going to come right back to it. So negative 3/2. So how to do that? You hit Control, divide, negative 3/2, and then put plus 1 plus 2, and that gives me 3/2. So let me go back to the problem again. So this is going to be m to the 3/2, and so now let's talk about the n. So I've got 2/3 plus 4 plus 8/9. So 2/3 plus 4 plus 8/9. So let me go to that. 2/3 plus 4 plus 8/9. All right, so 2/3 plus 4 plus, and hit Control divide, 8/9, and that gives me 50/9. So that'll be 50/9. It's okay to get big numbers, that's fine, 50/9. So m to the 3/2, n to the 50/9, over m to the 1st, n to the negative 2. I'm almost done. The only thing I've got to clean up now is move these two expressions up to the top. But remember, when you move them, they change sign. So this m to the 1st is going to be a negative 1. This n to the negative 2 is going to be a positive. So here's what you're going to have. M to the 3/2, m to the negative 1, n to the 50/9, n to the positive 2. And so now you can finish this problem up. So I see I've got 3/2 and negative 1. So then that means if I do that 3/2 minus 1, if you type that into your calculator, you should get 1/2. So m to the 1/2. And then n, do 50/9 plus 2. So if you do 50/9 plus 2, you should get 68/9. And so that would give me m to the 1/2 n to the 68/9. I'm going to double check that. 50/9 plus 2, I'm going to check that right quick. 50/9, so Control, divide, 50/9 plus 2, and that gives me, 68/9. And so that will be my answer. But again, guys, the whole purpose of this lesson is being able to take something that's really complex and breaking it down, simplifying it down so it's smaller than what you started with. That's the whole purpose, is being able to do that. And it's not really that hard as long as you got that calculator to help you out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. That's it for today's notes. I'll save this and upload it to YouTube.